Following video is not made for kids. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello to my subscribers, this is the TFangy coming to you with what unfortunately is something I was hoping to avoid. It is part 3 of my review of the Legacy Stunticons. I accidentally hit a button that turned my camera off. I was hoping to avoid doing that, but what are you going to do when you're trying to review a combiner transformer? So here in part 3 we've got Menasor himself. So moving my camera up a bit so we can get him in full screen. So there is Legacy Menasor all transformed up. And as I said in the first two parts, Art's Menasor is or you don't really need the other Legacy Stunticons to have a fully transforming Menasor figure. You can do that here just with Motormaster. But again, he is somewhat skeletal due to the holes in his legs and his arms being very skinny, so it is blatantly obvious that this was made to have all the Stunticons combined to it, but again, a Legacy Menasor, he's not a Scramble City Gestalt combiner like his Generation 1 figure. From what I've read on the instruction sheet, and also looking at the product photos for Menasor, this part right here, which was Motormaster's gun platform, this doesn't really integrate into Menasor, so you do unfortunately have to set that piece off to the side. So if you do decide to display your Legacy Stunticons in their combined form of Menasor, make sure you don't lose this piece if you ever want to someday transform Motormaster back into his vehicle mode. But yeah, he is a pretty tall looking combiner. For a size comparison with another Transformers action figure, pause the. Alright, so here is Legacy Menasor next to the War for Cybertron Trilogy Netflix spoiler pack version of Megatron, and as you can see, Menasor is a pretty tall combiner transformer armor. He's definitely commander class sized. I said when I looked at Motormaster's vehicle mode in part 2 that he seemed like he was stuffed into a small box, into a large box for a figure of his size due to how much empty space is actually inside the box when you get Motormaster for the first time. So I can kind of see why he was sold as a commander class figure, since that's how large Menasor is. But for Motormaster himself individually, even though he does transform into a large combiner, I will not deny that Legacy Menasor is really tall, but when you but Menasor really compresses down when you transform him into Motormaster's vehicle mode. So yeah, it's a pretty bittersweet irony that he could have been sold as a leader class figure, but Hasbro chose to purposely sell him as a commander class figure. So to get the parts of these Stunticons on here, it's pretty straightforward. So didn't I didn't plan on this being a 3-part review and it was only going to be 2 parts, I apologize for that. I was doing my best to avoid hitting the button that turns off my camera. I kept telling myself, don't hit that button, don't hit that button, be careful, but I didn't listen to myself enough and I accidentally pushed it. So now we have a 3-part review here. So I will hopefully upload part 3 as soon as part 2 is done uploading. So there's drag strip and dead end attached to it. Technically, if you wanted to attach the Stunticons in the order in which they were released, technically you should attach Wildrider second, since he was the second of the deluxe Stunticons to be released, and Dead End was third. And I've seen all sorts of reviews after Dragstrip and Wildrider were released. That's when Motormaster was released. So technically, Motormaster was the third of the Legacy Stunticons to be released, and then Wildrider after Dragstrip and Wildrider, Dead End was the 4th Stunticon to get released, and then Breakdown was the 5th and final one, who was actually released at the start of the current year of 2023. Alright everyone, we finally arrived at the moment we've been waiting for. Here is Legacy Menasor with all 5 Stunticons combined into him. And again, he's not a Scramble City Gestalt combiner, but he is a pretty impressive looking one all around. And here's Netflix Megatron again. I sincerely apologize for not bringing out my Combiner War Stunticons to do comparison reviews with. he was with, but this was easier for me to do it this way. But yeah, there's no denying Legacy Menasor is a pretty imposing Transformers action figure. Because of the price tags that the individual Stunticons went for, the deluxes being $25 a piece, and then Motormaster, I believe he was $85. Technically, Menasor is the most expensive Transformers action figure that was released in the Legacy Year One line, at least for the mass retail figures. So to complete Menasor, you do have to chuck out more money than you would to buy a Titan class Transformers figure. The Stunticons have been given a second reissue where they've been re-released in a Menasor gift set with slightly altered paint jobs. So there's now technically two versions of Legacy Menasor that are out there and exist in the world. If you want to try and make Menasor more G1 accurate to his cartoon animation model, you can technically flip Wildrider and break down around if you want. But unfortunately, this is nowhere near entirely accurate to the Generation 1 version of Menasor due to how again, and him not being a Scramble City combiner, but also with the way Breakdown and Wildrider transform into Menasor's legs. If you want Legacy Menasor to be fully accurate, what you'd have to do is take Breakdown and Wildrider, rotate them around 180 degrees, and then spin them around 180 degrees also to have them be to have them transform accurately. But yeah, it's a little disappointing that Hasbro and Takara didn't at least paint the panel sections on here, because basically all Wildrider and Breakdown transform into are calf muscles for Menasor's lower legs. Same thing with Dragstrip and Dead End. All they really transform into are the upper arm and lower arm muscles for Menasor, or they don't transform into the arms themselves. Elves, but gripes aside, I do admire Hasbro and Takara for making a Menasor, at least as his appearance in combined mode, it is accurate to his animation model, and it does look like an updated version of the Generation 1 action figure. First, thank you guys all so much. This has been the TFN Geek. This has been the third and final part of my review of Transformers Legacy Menasor / the Stunticons. And do I recommend getting these figures and adding them to your Transformers collection? Even if you have the Combiner Wars versions of the Stunticons like I do in your collection, absolutely. You cannot go wrong having the Stunticons in your Transformers collection. Menasor is a pretty nice and impressive and imposing combiner. Einer and other Transformers fans and collectors have already said this, but if Legacy Menasor is an indication as to what future combiner Transformers figures will look like, then I really hope Hasbro and Takara will re-release the combiners that we all got in the Combiner Wars line back in 2015 and 2016, because there's no denying that Legacy Menasor, he is a pretty imposing action figure. I originally was going to try and do comparisons with the Combiner Wars Stunticons, but with everything that's happened with me this year, losing my former job and then having to apply to my new job and adjusting to all the differences, would have been too time consuming and stressful for me than this review already has been. But if I have to be honest, as far as which version of Menasor is the better version, Combiner Wars or Legacy figure, unfortunately, I have to say it's a tie. It's a toss-up to which version is the better version of Menasor, Combiner Wars, or Legacy, because the Combiner Wars one at least has the Scramble City Gestalt gimmick that the Generation 1 versions of the Stunticons had, and that's where Legacy Menasor fails. And the reason why I keep bringing up Combiner Wars is that one thing you can do is that you can actually detach Legacy Menasor's legs, and it uses the same size and shaped pegs as the Combiner Wars combiners. So if you have, for instance, Combiner Wars Wildrider and Breakdown, you can swap them out with the Legacy figures and attach them to Legacy Menasor if you want him to at least have more G1 accurate looking legs. So it does nice that he has that integration of being able to interact with combiners, not just from the Combiner Wars line, but from the Power of the Primes line as well. So overall, as far as how great of a Transformers figure Legacy Menasor is, the Stunticons, I'd say they're pretty top notch. Not quite perfect, but perfect. But considering the fact that I believe this is only the third Generation 1 style version of Menasor that's been released, the first two being the original Generation 1 Menasor figure, and then the third being Combiner Wars. This is definitely a pretty impressive looking Transformers figure. Menasor was originally going to be one of the combiners that was going to be released in the Transformers Generation 2 line in 1995, but the figure was ultimately canceled. Combiner Wars Menasor was repainted into his Generation 2 color scheme. I do have the Combiner Wars Generation 2 versions of the Stunticons. So far, Dragstrip and Dead End have been repainted into their G2 colors. Whether or not Wildrider, Breakdown, and Takedown, or even Motormaster are going to be repainted into their G2 paint jobs, and we'll have a G2 version of Legacy Menasor is uncertain at this point. But from what I've seen from Transformers fans and collectors who've collected the G2 versions of Dragstrip and Dead End, they'd be willing to go into a full-blown Generation 2 Menasor combiner. And as far as the articulation for Menasor himself, like most large-sized Transformers figures, most of his joints are ratchet joints, so he has ratchet jointed elbows, ratchet jointed shoulders. The only joint that's not a ratchet and is in fact a swivel joint is his waist, so that's a nice swivel joint to see there. Arms can move inward and outward on a ratchet joint. Heavy ratchet jointed hips, swivel joints in the thighs, and heavy ratchet jointed knees, and also ratchet joints on the ankle tilts. So I'm not even going to use those because they're really really strong and stiff. So unfortunately, if you want to do a stop motion video of Legacy Menasor, it's going to be hard to do with those ratchet joints everywhere. So thank you guys all so much. I apologize for messing up and having to break the review into 3 parts. Alright, so until next time, you guys, this has been the TFN Geek. This has been my review of the Transformers Legacy Stunticons / Menasor Combiner. I highly recommend you get all 5 of the Stunticons if you can, because Menasor is a pretty impressive looking combiner. Here's hoping that we'll get more combiners like Menasor or someday. So far, Menasor is one of only 2 combiners that have been released in the Legacy line so far. The other one is the Core Class Volcanicus figure that's made up of the 6 Core Class Dinobots. I don't have the Dinobots. That's right now. But until next time, you guys, stay safe, stay healthy, transform and roll out. Goodbye, everyone.